She invited the man she thought she had buried, but she forgot that some men do not stay where shame leaves them. The wedding invitation arrived on a rainy Thursday evening in Indianapolis, thick cream paper inside a gold-lined envelope, the kind of invitation designed to make ordinary people feel underdressed before they even read the date. Caleb Morgan stood in the doorway of his small apartment, with oil still under his fingernails from a late shift at the warehouse, rain dripping from the brim of his cap onto the entry mat. He almost thought it was a mistake. Nobody sent paper invitations anymore unless they wanted the envelope itself to say something. The return address was from a resort near Lake Michigan, and the names embossed across the front were Brittany Morgan and Preston Blake. His ex-wife, her new husband-to-be, the man she had chosen while still wearing Caleb's ring. Caleb did not open it right away. He set his work bag down, kicked off his boots, and washed his hands at the kitchen sink, watching black streaks of grease circle the drain like a small storm. Only then did he sit at the little table near the window, where rain tapped the glass and the radiator clicked like it was counting down to something. Inside the invitation was a photograph of Brittany and Preston standing by the water, her hand on his chest, his smile polished and confident, both of them looking like people who believed the world had finally arranged itself correctly. Beneath the printed details, Brittany had written one sentence in blue ink. "I thought you deserved to see what success looks like." Caleb read it once. Then again. The words did not hurt the way she probably hoped they would. Pain needs surprise. This was confirmation. Brittany had always liked the last word, especially when she could dress it up as elegance. He could picture her writing it, head tilted, lips curved, imagining him in this apartment, still tired, still broke, still small enough for the sentence to land. A few years earlier, it would have. Back then, Caleb had been the man leaving divorce court with a cardboard box of papers and a suit jacket shiny at the elbows while Preston leaned against a black luxury car outside, pretending not to smile. Back then, Brittany had called him a poor man with poor dreams, and the phrase had followed him into grocery aisles, bus stops, warehouse break rooms, and nights so long the dawn felt like an accusation. But that man was not sitting at the table anymore. Not exactly. The apartment was still modest. The chairs were still mismatched. His hands still looked like they belonged to someone who lifted, fixed, carried, and rebuilt. But poverty is not always a permanent address. Sometimes it is a construction site. Caleb placed the invitation flat on the table and looked around the room that had witnessed his worst years without ever judging him. The second-hand couch, the folding desk, the old laptop where Morgan Freight Systems had started as a spreadsheet and a stubborn idea. The wall calendar full of delivery routes, investor calls, and meetings Brittany knew nothing about. He was no longer the man she had left for being poor. He was the founder of a company quietly moving industrial equipment across 6 states, signing contracts with people who never asked what his ex-wife thought of him. He had money now, yes, but that was not the part that made him smile. The part that made him smile was that Brittany had invited him to be humiliated in a room where her new life was already tied to a debt his company was about to control. Preston Blake did not know that yet. Brittany did not know it either. Caleb turned the invitation over, ran his thumb across the raised lettering, and felt no need to tear it, burn it, or throw it away. He had learned something in warehouses and courtrooms and lonely apartments. A man does not need to answer every insult when time is already preparing a better response. His phone buzzed with a message from Jordan Wells, his oldest friend and business partner. "Board package is ready. Margaret says the Blake file closes Monday." Caleb looked at the wedding date. Saturday, 2 days before the closing. The timing was almost rude. He typed back, "I received an invitation." Jordan replied a moment later. From her. Caleb looked at Brittany's handwriting again. The sentence meant to reduce him to the man she remembered. "Yes," he typed. "I think I will go." Rain kept tapping the window, soft and steady, while the invitation sat on the table like a challenge. Caleb leaned back, calm as the room around him, and for the first time since Brittany walked out, he did not feel abandoned by her future. He felt invited to witness its first crack. For a long time, Caleb Morgan believed poverty was just a season 2 people could survive if they kept choosing each other. He believed that when he married Brittany in a courthouse outside Indianapolis with a borrowed tie and a ring he bought on layaway. He believed it in the 1-bedroom apartment where the heater rattled all winter and the kitchen table tilted because one leg was shorter than the others. He believed it when Brittany cried over student loan statements, and he picked up extra shifts unloading freight until his shoulders ached so badly he had to sleep on his back. Back then, she called him hardworking. She said no one had ever made her feel so protected. She used to sit on the counter while he cooked discount pasta after midnight, swinging her feet and talking about the house they would buy someday, the trips they would take, the life they would build once money stopped standing in every doorway. Caleb carried those promises like tools. Not pretty. Necessary. He did not mind old boots, used furniture, or clipping coupons if it meant the future stayed possible. But Brittany began measuring time differently. At first, it was just a look when his car coughed before starting, then a sigh when he wore the same jacket to dinner twice. Then little jokes in front of her co-workers about how Caleb could find the clearance rack in any store in America. He laughed with them because a man in love often mistakes disrespect for humor if it comes wrapped in a smile. Preston Blake entered their life at a networking event Brittany attended for the real estate office where she worked as an assistant. He was polished in all the ways Caleb was not. Custom suits, smooth hands, a car with leather seats, and a dashboard that glowed like a private club. He talked about lakefront developments, investment syndicates, and people with second homes who never checked price tags. Brittany came home that night with bright eyes and a new vocabulary. Growth, lifestyle, standards. Caleb still talked about overtime, truck repairs, and paying down debt. Same kitchen, different language. Months later, he noticed her phone face down more often. New perfume. Later nights. A bracelet she said was from a client appreciation dinner, though no other assistant seemed to get one. When Caleb asked, she accused him of insecurity. That word became her favorite shield. Insecure when he noticed. Controlling when he cared. Small-minded when he asked why Preston's name kept appearing in conversations that used to belong to them. The truth finally arrived in a restaurant parking lot after a charity mixer, not with drama, but with timing. Caleb had come to pick her up because her car was in the shop. Through the rain-specked windshield, he saw Brittany standing beneath the awning with Preston's hand resting comfortably at the small of her back. She did not move away. She did not look startled. She looked relieved. That hurt more than guilt would have. Later, in their apartment, she did not deny much. She just folded her arms and said, "I cannot keep wasting my life on a poor man with poor dreams." The sentence sat in the room longer than either of them did. Caleb remembered looking at the unpaid electric bill on the counter, then at the lunchbox he had packed for the next day's warehouse shift, and realizing she had not left because he failed to love her. She left because love did not come with enough shine. The divorce moved quickly once Preston's money entered the room. Brittany took the newer furniture, the good dishes, most of the savings, and every mutual friend who preferred success with clean shoes. At the courthouse, Caleb walked out carrying a cardboard box of documents, his suit jacket damp under the arms, his pride folded smaller than the papers inside. Preston leaned against a black car near the curb, one ankle crossed over the other, smiling like a man watching a bad investment close. Brittany stood beside him in sunglasses, though the sky was gray. "You will be fine," she said, the way people say things when they do not care if they are true. Caleb did not answer. He only looked at Preston's smile, then at Brittany's ringless hand, and stored the moment somewhere deep and quiet. Some men explode when they are humiliated. Caleb went to work. That was the part Brittany never understood. Poor did not mean finished. Poor meant early. The first winter after the divorce, Caleb learned that a man can lose almost everything and still be expected at work by 6 in the morning. The warehouse outside Indianapolis did not care about heartbreak. Pallets still needed to be moved. Shipping labels still needed to be scanned. Trucks still backed into loading bays before dawn with their warning beeps cutting through the dark like a clock that hated excuses. Caleb took the night shift because it paid an extra $2 an hour, and because sleeping alone in the apartment was harder than staying busy under fluorescent lights. The place smelled like cardboard dust, diesel exhaust, and coffee burned black in the break room pot. It was not a life anyone envied, but it was a floor under his feet, and after Brittany left, a floor was enough to start with. He rented the cheapest apartment he could find, one room above a laundromat where the walls vibrated whenever the dryers ran late. He ate canned soup, peanut butter sandwiches, and grocery store rotisserie chicken stretched across 3 dinners. On Fridays, when his co-workers went out for beer, Caleb went to the public library and read books on transportation systems, inventory management, freight contracts, and small business taxes. Pride had already been stripped down to the studs. There was no shame left in learning. That was where Jordan Wells first noticed him. Jordan worked dispatch, a tall man with tired eyes and a mind that moved faster than most people talked. One night, a shipment of industrial compressor parts was about to miss its delivery window because the routing software had put 2 trucks in the wrong sequence. The supervisor was ready to blame weather, traffic, anything official enough to sound unavoidable. Caleb looked at the route board for less than a minute and said, "Swap the Evansville drop with Fort Wayne. Call the driver before mile marker 70, and split the last pallet onto the Cincinnati return truck." Everyone stared at him like the forklift had spoken. Jordan checked the numbers, then laughed once under his breath. "You been hiding that brain under a scanner gun?" Caleb shrugged. Problems get louder when nobody listens early. The reroute worked. The client never knew how close the failure came. That night, Jordan followed Caleb into the break room and sat across from him with 2 paper cups of bad coffee. "You ever think about doing this for yourself?" he asked. Caleb almost dismissed it. Men who had just lost a marriage, savings, and half their furniture do not usually picture themselves starting companies. But Jordan kept talking. He had contacts. Caleb had operational instincts. The market had gaps big enough to drive a semi through. Smaller manufacturers were being ignored by the big logistics firms because their shipments were complicated but not large enough to flatter anyone's quarterly reports. Caleb listened, silent, hands wrapped around the coffee cup. Somewhere inside him, something that had been buried under Brittany's words moved slightly. Poor dreams. He remembered her saying it with such certainty, as if the future had asked her opinion before deciding what he was worth. After work, Caleb began filling notebooks with everything the warehouse got wrong. Delays, billing errors, misrouted pallets, drivers waiting unpaid, customers calling 3 departments for 1 answer. He did not complain. He studied. Complaint wastes pain. Study uses it. Months passed that way. Night shift, library, notebooks, cheap meals, colder mornings. Sometimes he saw photos of Brittany and Preston online. Wine glasses, lake views, charity events, the shine of a life designed to be seen. He stopped looking after a while. Not because it stopped hurting, but because pain can become entertainment if you keep buying tickets to it. The day everything changed did not look dramatic. Jordan slid a folded sheet across the break room table with the names of 3 small manufacturers who needed reliable freight coordination and were tired of being treated like leftovers. "We call them," Jordan said. "We offer better tracking, faster communication, and no nonsense." Caleb looked at the paper, then at the loading bay beyond the break room window, where men in steel-toe boots moved through cold air under harsh lights, building other people's margins 1 pallet at a time. "We would need a lawyer," Caleb said. Jordan smiled. "I know one. Margaret Ellis. Mean with contracts. Fair with people who work." Caleb picked up the paper. It felt lighter than a wedding invitation and heavier than divorce documents. For the first time in months, the future did not look like something Preston had stolen. It looked like something waiting on a phone call. Caleb met Margaret Ellis for the first time in a coffee shop that sat between a tire store and a tax office, the kind of place where the chairs did not match and the owner knew every regular by the way they took their coffee. Margaret arrived exactly on time, wearing a dark blazer, carrying a leather folder, and looking at Caleb and Jordan like she had already decided whether they were serious before they opened their mouths. She was in her early 50s, sharp-eyed, calm, and allergic to nonsense. Jordan introduced her as a lawyer who had once represented trucking firms large enough to buy buildings and small enough to be ruined by 1 bad contract. Margaret listened while Caleb explained the problem. Small manufacturers getting ignored by oversized logistics providers, delayed shipments, poor communication, drivers waiting unpaid, clients calling 3 departments for 1 answer, money leaking out of systems nobody bothered to fix because the accounts were not glamorous. Caleb did not use fancy words. He spoke in routes, invoices, dock times, fuel surcharges, and broken promises. Margaret did not interrupt once. When he finished, she opened her folder and slid a blank legal pad across the table. "Write down what you can do better by Monday," she said. Caleb looked at the page. "That is a long list." "Good," Margaret said. "A company is just a long list of problems somebody finally decided to own." That sentence stayed with him. Morgan Freight Systems did not begin with a ribbon cutting or a logo on a glass door. It began in the back room of a rented office with one flickering light, 2 used laptops, a printer that jammed when it rained, and 3 clients who were too frustrated to be loyal to anyone else. Caleb still worked nights at the warehouse for the first 6 months, then drove to the office after sunrise with coffee in a paper cup and warehouse dust in his hair. Jordan handled dispatch calls before his own shift. Margaret built contracts tight enough to protect them from clients who smiled while delaying payment. There was no glamour in it. There were bounced checks, broken printers, midnight calls from drivers outside Dayton, invoices disputed by people who never read their own agreements, and mornings when Caleb slept 2 hours with his boots still on because sitting down too long felt dangerous. But the work made sense to him. Pain had sharpened his attention. Poverty had taught him not to waste motion. Divorce had taught him that promises without structure are just pretty weather. By the second year, Morgan Freight Systems had 6 employees, a real office, and a whiteboard full of routes stretching across Indiana, Ohio, Illinois, and Michigan. By the third, Caleb no longer needed the warehouse job. He still kept his old scanner badge in the desk drawer, beside the court documents from the divorce and the first handwritten route plan Jordan had slid across the breakroom table. Not as trophies, as witnesses. Every time someone called him lucky, he thought about canned soup over a laundromat, cold loading bays at 4 in the morning, and Brittany's voice saying poor dreams like it was a diagnosis. Luck had not filled those notebooks. Luck had not called angry clients back at midnight. Luck had not sat across from Margaret while she circled contract clauses in red pen and said, again, but smarter. One afternoon, almost 4 years after the divorce, Caleb walked into a regional manufacturing conference in Chicago wearing a navy suit he had bought without checking the price tag 3 times. Nobody there knew him as Brittany's ex-husband. Nobody knew Preston had once smiled outside the courthouse while Caleb carried his life in a cardboard box. They knew him as the founder of Morgan Freight Systems, the man whose company answered calls, delivered when it said it would, and fixed small disasters before they became expensive enough for executives to notice. That was the first time he understood success was not revenge. Revenge still asks the past to watch. Success forgets the past has a seat. Years kept moving. Contracts grew. The office expanded. Jordan became Chief Operations Officer. Margaret became General Counsel and the only person Caleb trusted to tell him when ambition was getting sloppy. Then, one rainy Thursday evening, the wedding invitation arrived in his old apartment because Brittany had sent it to the last address where she believed poverty had frozen him in place. She did not know he still kept that apartment under lease for traveling staff and late-night work. She did not know the modest room where she imagined him suffering had become a reminder of where the company began. She did not know Morgan Freight Systems had recently acquired a distressed logistics debt package connected to Blake Properties, Preston's real estate firm. She did not know the man she invited as a joke would arrive with the woman holding Preston's Monday morning. Caleb looked at the invitation again that night, then placed it in a folder labeled Lake Michigan. Not personal, not revenge, business, with history attached. Caleb parked his car outside the suburban wedding venue, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the manicured lawn, and took a deep breath before stepping out, remembering the office whiteboard filled with routes that had been his world for years. Inside, the reception hall was busy with last-minute preparations, waitstaff arranging centerpieces, florists adjusting bouquets, and the soft hum of a string quartet tuning their instruments. Caleb moved through the entrance quietly, watching attendees who barely recognized him as Brittany's ex-husband. To them, he was just another guest, a name on a list, nothing more. Jordan, by his side, whispered details about table arrangements and seating charts, but Caleb barely heard him, his mind on the past decade of hard work, late nights, and relentless determination that had rebuilt everything he had once lost. The air smelled faintly of roses and polished wood, mingling with the aroma of hors d'oeuvres being prepared on the buffet tables, a mix of smoked salmon, roasted vegetables, and artisan breads. He scanned the room, noting familiar faces from previous contracts, logistics partners, and business meetings that had once seemed overwhelming but now felt manageable under his steady leadership. Margaret, standing near the registration desk, nodded discreetly, her eyes conveying confidence that they were prepared for any unexpected surprises. and Caleb felt a sense of reassurance knowing she was overseeing the event, the contracts and legal considerations all secured and arranged flawlessly. As the bride's friends laughed and took selfies near the floral arch, Caleb felt a mix of nostalgia and curiosity, thinking back to the small office where Morgan Freight Systems had started with 2 laptops, a printer that jammed when it rained, and 3 clients who were too frustrated to remain loyal to anyone else. He remembered the nights spent tracking routes, resolving disputes, and ensuring that the business ran smoothly despite limited resources and personal setbacks. Now, a decade later, Caleb stood in a spacious venue, professionally dressed, carrying the weight of experience and growth, confident in the company he had built and the life he had reclaimed. The music swelled as the ceremony started, guests settling into their seats while servers quietly moved through the aisles, and Caleb noticed Brittany across the room, her eyes briefly meeting his, revealing a mixture of surprise and recognition that he had anticipated but still found unsettling. He reminded himself that he was no longer the man defined by her decisions. He was the man who had rebuilt, thrived, and created stability for himself and his team. Taking another deep breath, Caleb allowed himself a small, measured smile, acknowledging the journey that had led him here, the professional achievements, the personal growth, and the resilience that defined his character, while remaining alert and composed, ready to face the unexpected events that might unfold during the wedding reception and understanding fully that his presence alone, composed and confident, was already altering the dynamics of the room and drawing subtle attention from those who had once doubted or underestimated him. By the time the first round of champagne began moving through the reception hall, Caleb understood the wedding had not been designed only to celebrate Brittany and Preston. It had been designed to display them. The resort overlooked Lake Michigan through walls of glass, the water dark blue under a pale evening sky, white chairs lined in perfect rows, chandeliers glowing above floral arrangements tall enough to hide conversations. Everything looked expensive in the way insecure people prefer, not elegant, just loud with price. Brittany stood near the entrance in a white gown that caught every light in the room, her smile bright, her posture practiced, her eyes returning to Caleb more often than she wanted anyone to notice. Preston noticed too. He wore a black tuxedo, a gold watch, and the tense smile of a man who believed confidence should be visible from across the room. When he crossed toward Caleb, 2 groomsmen followed as if status required witnesses. "Caleb Morgan," Preston said, offering a hand with too much theater. "Did not think you would actually make it." Caleb shook it once. "I was invited." Preston's smile tightened. "That is generous of Brittany, do you not think? Some people would find this uncomfortable." Caleb looked past him at the lake, where wind pushed small waves against the shore. Some people confused discomfort with importance. One of the groomsmen looked down to hide a smile. Preston heard it and stiffened. Brittany arrived a moment later, carrying the faint scent of roses and expensive perfume, her face glowing with the satisfaction of someone stepping onto a stage she thought she owned. "Caleb," she said, sweetly enough for nearby guests. "You came. You asked me to." Her eyes flicked over his suit, his shoes, the quiet watch on his wrist. She had expected something else. A cheaper jacket, a tired face, the apartment version of him. Confusion moved behind her smile. "I hope the trip was not too much," she said. "I know Michigan can be a lot." There it was, the old habit of placing him beneath the room while pretending to be kind. Caleb almost admired the consistency. Before he could answer, Jordan Wells stepped beside him, calm and broad-shouldered in a navy suit. Margaret Ellis stood on his other side, holding a slim leather portfolio. Brittany's attention shifted to them. "Friends of yours?" she asked. "Business partners," Caleb said. Preston's eyes moved to Margaret, then back to Caleb. Something changed there, small but visible. Men like Preston always recognized lawyers before they recognized consequences. "What kind of business?" Brittany asked, still smiling, though her voice had lost a little polish. Caleb did not answer immediately. Across the room, a man near the bar stared at him, whispered to another guest, and then looked again. Recognition travels strangely. Slowly at first, then all at once. The whisper reached a table near the window. Someone said, "Morgan Freight Systems?" Another guest turned. Preston's jaw moved once. Margaret opened her portfolio and removed a sealed envelope, Not dramatically, simply professionally, the way she did everything. "Mr. Blake," she said, "I was going to have our office contact your counsel Monday morning, but since we are all here, I will keep this brief and courteous. Morgan Freight Systems has acquired the distressed logistics note tied to Blake Properties Midwest Development Group. Formal restructuring discussions begin at 9 o'clock Monday." The words did not echo, but they traveled. Preston's face changed one shade at a time. Brittany looked from Margaret to Preston, then to Caleb, trying to assemble a picture she had spent years refusing to imagine. Around them, the reception hall softened into silence. Forks paused, glasses lowered. The string quartet kept playing for 3 more seconds, then faltered as if the music had realized it was no longer the most important sound in the room. Caleb stood still, hands relaxed, breathing even. He had not come to ruin a wedding. He had come as invited. The room did not go quiet because he was rich. It went quiet because Brittany had been wrong. Preston Blake recovered faster than Brittany did, or at least he tried to. Men like him were trained to treat embarrassment as a public relations problem, something to be redirected before anyone could measure the damage. He gave a short laugh, adjusted his cuff, and looked around the reception hall as if the silence belonged to someone else. "This is hardly the time for business," he said, his voice polished but thinner than before. Margaret Ellis held his gaze with the calm of a woman who had ended louder conversations in smaller rooms. "I agree," she said. "That is why I said Monday morning." A few guests near the bar exchanged glances. One older man in a gray suit whispered something to his wife, and she looked at Preston with the careful expression people wear when money starts smelling like smoke. Brittany stood between the 2 men in her white gown, the train arranged perfectly around her feet, but perfection had stopped helping her. Her eyes stayed on Caleb's face, searching for the man she remembered, the one who would have looked down, apologized for existing in the wrong room, and made her feel generous for tolerating him. He was not there. Caleb glanced toward the lake beyond the glass, where the wind kept pressing small waves against the shore. He had promised himself he would not turn her wedding into a courtroom, not because she deserved protection, but because he did not need theater to prove what time had already proven. "Preston," he said evenly, "Margaret is right. Monday is soon enough." Preston smiled too quickly. "You are enjoying this." Caleb looked back at him. "No, I remember it." That sentence settled into the room with more weight than any accusation. Preston's jaw tightened. He wanted anger, something messy enough to point at. Caleb gave him memory instead. Brittany finally spoke, her voice low enough that only the nearest circle heard. "Caleb, can we talk privately?" Jordan's eyes moved to Caleb, but he said nothing. Margaret closed her portfolio with a soft click, the sound of a boundary being respected but not removed. Caleb nodded once. For a minute, Brittany led him through a side door onto the balcony overlooking Lake Michigan. The evening air was cooler there, moving off the water and lifting the edges of her veil. Inside, the reception hall glowed behind them, all chandeliers, white flowers, and people pretending not to stare through the glass. For a moment, Brittany did not speak. She looked smaller outside the room she had built to make herself look powerful. "You should have told me," she said at last. Caleb turned toward her slowly. "Told you what? That you had become this." She gestured vaguely toward the room, toward Margaret, toward the silence his name had created. Caleb almost smiled. Not kindly, not cruelly, just with the exhaustion of a man hearing the same mistake in a new dress. "This," he asked. "Successful? Important?" Brittany's eyes flashed. "Do not twist my words. I do not have to." The wind pressed between them. Her bouquet rested on a small iron table nearby, white roses tied with silk ribbon, beautiful and useless in the darkening air. Caleb looked at it and remembered another cheap bouquet he had bought years ago from a grocery store cooler because Brittany said flowers made even a bad apartment feel like a beginning. She had cried when he handed them to her. He wondered when memory became something only one person was responsible for carrying. "You invited me to see what success looks like," he said. "So I came." Brittany swallowed. "I was hurt then. You were married to me then." Her face tightened, and for the first time that night, the gown, the resort, the polished life around her could not rescue the truth from landing. Caleb stepped toward the balcony rail, looking out at the dark water. "You did not leave because I was poor, Brittany. You left because you believed poor was permanent. You believed struggle was a stain instead of a season. And you needed me to stay small so your choice would look wise. Behind the glass, Preston was speaking urgently to someone on his phone, one hand pressed over his other ear, his confidence breaking into pieces too small to polish. Brittany followed Caleb's gaze and saw it too. The man she had chosen for security now looked like a man waiting for someone else to save him. "Caleb," she whispered, "I did not know." He turned back to her. "No, you knew who I was. You just thought that was not enough." The words did not raise their voice. They did not need to. Brittany's eyes filled, but Caleb had learned years ago that tears after consequence are not the same as regret before cruelty. Inside, the music tried to restart. It sounded distant, uncertain, like even the strings were asking permission. Caleb adjusted his cuff and stepped toward the balcony door. "Enjoy your wedding," he said. "Monday will be business." Then he walked back into the light, leaving Brittany outside with the lake wind, the white roses, and the first honest silence she had heard all day. Caleb stepped back into the reception hall and felt the room pretend to breathe again. Conversations restarted in cautious pieces, like guests were testing whether laughter was still allowed. The string quartet resumed a soft melody, but the notes floated unevenly beneath the chandeliers, never quite covering the silence Margaret's announcement had left behind. Jordan stood near the bar with his hands folded in front of him, watching Preston Blake across the room with the calm attention of a man who understood logistics, leverage, and timing. Margaret had already returned the sealed documents to her portfolio, her expression composed, as if she had not just shifted the gravity of an entire wedding with 3 professional sentences. Caleb accepted a glass of water from a passing server and set it untouched on a nearby table. He had no appetite for victory. Victory was too loud a word for a moment like this. What he felt was distance. Clean, steady distance from the courthouse hallway, from the cardboard box, from Brittany's voice calling his dreams poor. Across the hall, Preston was no longer smiling. He stood near a side corridor, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in clipped sentences while one of his groomsmen stared at the floor. Brittany came back inside a minute later, her veil slightly disturbed by the lake wind, her face arranged into something close to composure but not strong enough to survive close inspection. She walked toward Preston, reached for his arm, and he pulled away without meaning to make it visible. But people saw. People always see the thing you most want hidden. A quiet ripple passed through the room. Brittany froze for half a second, and Caleb saw the exact moment her chosen future stopped looking like rescue and started looking like another performance she would have to finance with denial. Preston lowered his phone and spoke to her under his breath, too low for the room, but his face said enough. Monday morning was no longer a date on a calendar. It was a deadline. The wedding coordinator approached with a nervous smile, asking whether they were ready to continue with the ceremony. Brittany looked toward Caleb, not because she wanted him, not exactly, but because her mind was trying to understand how the man she had invited as proof of her upgrade had become the one person in the room who did not need anything from her. Caleb looked away first. That was his final mercy. He crossed to Jordan and Margaret. "We are done here," he said. Jordan nodded. Margaret glanced toward the balcony, then toward Preston. "You handled it cleaner than most men would have." Caleb picked up the invitation from inside his jacket pocket, the cream paper still folded along its original lines. "She wanted me here as a reminder." "And?" Jordan asked. Caleb looked once more at the reception hall, at the flowers, the glass walls, the lake beyond them, and the bride standing beside a man who had suddenly become less certain than his suit. "I was," he said, "not of poverty, not of failure, of consequence." They walked toward the exit before the ceremony restarted. No announcement, no dramatic turn, just 3 people leaving through the same doors the guests had watched him enter. Near the lobby, Brittany hurried after him, one hand lifting the front of her dress so it would not catch under her shoes. "Caleb, wait." He stopped beside a tall window overlooking the driveway, where valet attendants moved beneath soft resort lights and the wind coming off Lake Michigan shook the ornamental grass. Brittany reached him breathless, her eyes bright, her voice smaller now. "Did you come here to punish me?" Caleb turned, calm enough to hear the question without letting it rewrite the night. "No," he said. "I came because you invited me." She looked down at the invitation in his hand, and for the first time, the handwritten sentence seemed to embarrass her. "I should not have written that." "No," Caleb said. but I am glad you did." Her face lifted sharply. "Why?" He slipped the invitation back into his pocket. "Because it reminded me that you never left for a better man. You left for a better-looking illusion." Behind her, Preston's voice called her name from the hallway, tense and impatient. Brittany did not turn right away. Caleb did. He walked out into the cool Michigan evening with Jordan and Margaret beside him, the resort lights glowing behind glass, the lake dark beyond the trees, and the wedding music trying to rise again without ever becoming joyful. Caleb reached the parking circle just as the first evening wind came hard off Lake Michigan, carrying the smell of water, cut grass, and rain that had not arrived yet. Behind him, the resort glowed through the tall windows, all chandeliers and white flowers and careful smiles trying to recover from a truth too large to fold back into ceremony. Jordan walked a few steps ahead to signal the valet, while Margaret stood beside Caleb with her portfolio tucked under one arm, quiet as ever. "You know," she said, "some people would have stayed to watch the rest fall apart." Caleb looked through the glass one last time. Brittany stood near the hallway, her white dress bright under the lights, Preston beside her, but not close enough to look united anymore. Guests were still pretending to celebrate, but the room had changed. They all knew it. Brittany knew it most. "I already saw enough," Caleb said. The valet brought the car around, black paint reflecting the resort lights in long broken lines. Caleb slid into the back seat and rested one hand on the invitation folded inside his jacket. He thought about the apartment above the laundromat, the warehouse dust under his nails, the courthouse hallway where Preston had smiled, and the years when every step forward had been taken without applause. For a long time, he had imagined success as the day Brittany would finally regret leaving. But sitting there, watching the resort shrink through the rear window, he realized regret was not as satisfying as peace. Regret still belonged to her. Peace belonged to him. The car pulled onto the road, curving along the dark water, and Lake Michigan flashed between the trees like a sheet of black glass. Jordan glanced back from the front passenger seat. "Monday is going to be interesting." Margaret gave him a look. "Monday is going to be professional." Caleb smiled faintly. "That is the difference." His phone buzzed once. A text from an unknown number, though he already knew who it was. "I did not know you became this successful." He read it, then turned the screen off without answering. That sentence said everything. She did not say she was sorry for the courthouse. She did not say she was sorry for the affair, the insults, the years of calling his ambition small. She was sorry she had mispriced him. That was not love. That was appraisal. Rain started before they reached the highway, soft at first, then steady, tapping against the windows like the night was closing the file. Caleb leaned back, finally letting his shoulders loosen. He had not ruined her wedding. He had only arrived exactly where she asked him to be, carrying the life she never believed he could build. Some people invite your past because they think it will embarrass you. They forget the past is also where your strength learned its name. So tell me honestly, if someone left you when you had nothing and came face to face with who you became, would you explain your worth, or would you let your silence do the talking? And if this story made you think about betrayal, dignity, and the quiet power of rebuilding when nobody believes in you, stay with this channel. Because sometimes the strongest revenge is not destroying the person who doubted you, but becoming so steady that their judgment no longer reaches you.